The wind in the San Juan Basin did not blow so much as it scoured. It was a living thing, invisible and hungry, stripping the topsoil from the earth and the softness from anyone foolish enough to stay. Lila Reyes stood on the porch of the Mercer homestead, wrapped in a shawl that had been threadbare 3 winters ago, and watched the dust devils dance across the gray sagebrush. The valley was vast, a bowl of brown grass and dry washes rimmed by mountains that looked like the jagged teeth of a trap. The sky was too large. It pressed down on a person, making them feel small and easily broken. Lila tightened her grip on her small canvas bag. She had walked 12 miles from the stage stop in Aztec, and her boots were thin-soled, letting her feel every stone on the road. She was 24 years old, but her eyes held the weary caution of a woman twice that age. She had come here because she had heard Silas Mercer needed a cook and a hand who could stitch canvas and leather, and because the last town had grown too small for a woman of her mixed blood to live in without fear. The door to the main house opened. It was a heavy slab of oak, reinforced with iron straps. The man who stepped out was tall, built like the twisted juniper trees that clung to the ridge lines, weathered, silent, and hard. Silas Mercer did not look at her face first. He looked at her hands. "You are the one who sent word," he said. It was not a question. His voice sounded like gravel grinding under a wagon wheel. "I am," Lila said. She held her chin up. It was a habit she had forced herself to learn. "If you look at the ground, men think they can walk on you. I can cook. I can mend tack. I can wash. I ask for $12 a month in a room with a lock." Silas looked at her then. His eyes were the color of freezing water, pale blue and empty of anything that looked like warmth. He had lost his wife and a young son to the fever 4 years ago, and the neighbors said he had died with them, leaving only a body behind to work the cattle. "There is a room off the kitchen," Silas said. "It has a bolt. You will cook for me and 5 hands. Breakfast before sunup, supper after sundown. The rest of the day you mend whatever is torn. If you steal, you walk. If you bring trouble, you walk." Lila nodded once. "I bring no trouble, Mr. Mercer. Trouble usually finds its own way without my help." She stepped inside. The house smelled of stale coffee, wood smoke, and the sour scent of men who lived without a woman's touch to keep the domestic chaos at bay. It was cold, even out of the wind. She set her bag down in the small room off the kitchen. It was little more than a closet with a cot and a narrow window. But when she checked the door, there was indeed a heavy iron bolt. She slid it home, listening to the metal click. It was the first time she had breathed fully in 3 days. The work was not hard. It was crushing. The Mercer Ranch ran 2,000 head of cattle over terrain that would kill a horse if it stepped wrong. The mornings began in the pitch black, with the air so cold it felt solid in the lungs. Lila woke at 4 to break the ice on the water bucket and stoke the cast iron stove until its belly glowed red. She made biscuits, fried salt pork, and boiled coffee that was thick enough to chew. The hands were a rough lot. There was old Pete, who had no teeth and a history he kept hidden. Dutch, a massive man with a slow mind and heavy fists, and 3 drifters who stayed for the wages and the food. They watched her with the wariness of wild dogs. They ate quickly, heads down, scraping their plates clean. They did not say thank you. They did not make conversation. In this country, words were spent as carefully as water. Lila learned quickly that silence was her best armor. She moved around the table like a shadow, filling cups and clearing plates. She felt their eyes on her back, assessing, wondering. She wore high-necked dresses she had remade from older clothes, hiding her shape, but she could not hide the dark warmth of her skin or the thick braid of black hair that marked her as different. Silas Mercer was a ghost in his own house. He ate standing up near the stove, his hat pulled low. He gave orders in short bursts. Move the herd to the south pasture, fix the fence at the creek, shoot the lame calf. He never spoke to Lila unless he had to. Yet, he watched. One afternoon, 2 weeks into her employment, Lila was at the barn, mending a torn saddle fender. The leather was stiff with age and sweat. She sat on a crate, the awl in one hand and the heavy needle in the other, driving the thread through with a force that made her knuckles white. A young mare, a skittish roan that the men had been trying to break for a month, was tied nearby. Rolling her eyes and stomping, Dutch came into the barn, loud and clumsy. He threw a saddle down, and the crash sent the mare into a panic. She reared, her hooves flashing, snapping the lead rope. Dutch shouted and reached for a shovel to strike her, his face red with sudden anger. "Stop," Lila said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the dusty air like a whip crack. She dropped the leather and walked toward the mare. She did not run. She did not raise her hands. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, making a low humming sound in her throat. Dutch froze, the shovel half raised. The mare trembled, her ears pinned back. But she watched Lila. Lila stopped 2 feet from the horse's nose. She did not reach out. She just stood there, letting the animal smell her, letting her own calm bleed into the panic. Slowly, the mare lowered her head. Lila reached out and touched the velvet nose, then ran her hand up the neck to the ear, scratching the itch that all nervous horses have. "You will ruin her if you hit her," Lila said, not looking at Dutch. "She needs a firm hand, not a heavy one." She felt a shadow in the doorway. Silas was standing there, leaning against the frame. He had seen it all. He looked at Dutch, then at Lila. "Get back to work." "Dutch," Silas said. Dutch dropped the shovel and grumbled, "Moving away." Silas walked over to where Lila stood by the horse. He looked at the mended saddle she had left on the crate, then at the way her hand rested on the mare's neck. "You have hands for horses," he said. "My father raised mustangs in the basin before the army came." Lila said, "I learned before I could walk." Silas nodded. It was a small movement. "Fix the cinch on the gray gelding when you are done with that fender." He turned and walked away. It was not praise, but it was an acknowledgement. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic shifted. The men stopped spitting on the floor when she walked in. They started leaving their muddy boots by the door. It was a wary respect, earned by the fact that she did her work and did not complain about the splinters or the burns from the stove. But the town was different. In late October, Silas took the wagon into town for winter supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, and ammunition. He told Lila to come with him to select the cloth for the men's new shirts. The ride took 4 hours under a pale, unforgiving sun. The town was a collection of raw lumber buildings strung along a muddy street. When Lila walked into the general store behind Silas, the conversation died. The storekeeper, a man with watery eyes and a stained apron, looked right past her to Silas. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," he said. "Help you?" Silas handed him a list. Lila moved to the back, where the bolts of fabric were stacked. She could feel the eyes of the other customers. 2 women in bonnets and a man in a dusty coat. They whispered. She heard the words mongrel and squaw muttered under breath. Soft enough to be denied, but loud enough to wound. She kept her face impassive, her fingers testing the weight of a gray wool. "Well now, look what we have here." Lila turned. A deputy stood there, a man with a tin star pinned to a vest that was too tight. He had a face that looked like it had been molded from dough and left out to harden. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold. "You are the stray Silas picked up," the deputy said. He stepped closer, invading her space. He smelled of whiskey and old sweat. "We do not see many of your kind working inside a white man's house. Usually, you're out in the stables." Lila did not step back. To step back was to invite the chase. "I'm selecting cloth for the ranch," she said. The deputy reached out and fingered the sleeve of her dress. "It is a waste of good wool on a savage," he said. Lila slapped his hand away. It was a reflex, sharp and fast. The sound rang through the quiet store. The deputy's face turned a mottled purple. He reached for her arm, his grip bruising. "You need to learn your place." "Girl," he hissed. "Let her go." The voice came from the front of the store. Silas was standing by the counter. He had not raised his voice, but the threat in it was unmistakable. He looked at the deputy with that same dead, cold stare. "She is my property," Silas said. "You damage my property. You pay me for it, and you cannot afford my prices." The deputy sneered, but released Lila's arm. "You best keep a leash on her," "Mercer, this is a decent town." Silas did not answer. He paid for the goods, his movements deliberate. "Come," he said to Lila. They walked out to the wagon in silence. Lila sat on the hard bench, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt sick. My property. He had defended her. Yes. He had stopped the man from hurting her. But he had not called her a person. He had called her property, like a horse or a saddle. As they rode back toward the ranch, the silence stretched for miles. "You should not have struck a lawman," Silas said finally, staring at the mule's ears. "He touched me," Lila said. "I belong to no one." Silas glanced at her. His gaze was heavy. It traveled over her face, noting the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes. For a moment, she saw something flicker in his expression. Not anger, but a dark, possessive recognition. "You live under my roof," he said. "You eat my food, in this valley. That means you belong to the ranch. It is the only thing that keeps you safe." "I can keep myself safe," Lila said. Silas gave a short, humorless laugh. "Look around you, girl. There is no safety here. There is only ownership and luck runs out." The tension between them tightened after that day. It was not a romantic tension, not in the way the dime novels described. It was the tension of two predators sharing a cage. Silas watched her more. He watched her knead the dough for the bread, his eyes following the movement of her arms. He watched her wash the dishes, the firelight catching the curve of her neck. One evening, Lila cut her thumb paring potatoes. The blood welled up, bright and fast. She moved to the basin to wash it. Silas was there before she could turn. He took her hand in his. His grip was rough, his calluses scraping her skin. He held her hand under the lamp, looking at the cut. Then he looked at her. He did not let go. He stood too close. Lila could smell the tobacco and the faint scent of whiskey on him. He was a large man, and in that small kitchen, he felt like a wall closing in. "Let me bind it," Lila said, trying to pull her hand back. He held it a second longer than was necessary. His thumb brushed over her wrist, feeling the pulse that fluttered there like a trapped bird. "You have strong blood," he murmured. "It is hard to spill." Lila met his gaze. She made her eyes flat and hard. "Don't mistake me, Mr. Mercer. I am here to work, nothing else." Silas released her hand abruptly. He turned away, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I know why you are here," he said, his back to her. November brought the branding of the late calves. The neighbors from the Box T Ranch came over to help, bringing their own crew. The corrals were a chaos of dust, smoke, and the terrible bawling of the calves as the hot iron seared their hide. The smell of burnt hair and flesh hung heavy in the air. Lila worked at the long trestle tables set up outside, serving stew and biscuits to 20 men. She kept her head down, moving quickly, but she could not shut her ears. She heard the men talking near the fire. "Mercer's got himself a fine-looking squaw," one of the Box T hands said, laughing. "Keeps the winter chill off, I bet." "Why else would he hire her?" another man said. "A man gets lonely, and a woman like that, well, she knows what she is for." Lila gripped the ladle until her hand cramped. She wanted to scream. She wanted to overturn the pot of boiling stew onto their boots. But she did nothing. She knew that if she reacted, it would only confirm their lies. She was a stone. She was a tree. She was nothing they could touch. She looked over at Silas. He was standing by the corral fence, talking to the foreman of the Box T. He looked over at the men who were laughing. Then he looked at her. He did not stop them. He did not defend her honor. He turned back to the foreman and continued talking about the price of beef. The realization settled in her gut like cold lead. To him, she was useful. She was competent, but she was not equal. And if the world decided to use her, he might step in to protect his investment, but he would not step in to protect her heart. The days grew shorter. The wind turned bitter, carrying the scent of snow from the high peaks. The anniversary of Silas's loss came in early December. The ranch hands knew it was coming. They grew quiet. They found work to do in the far pastures. They avoided the main house. Silas stopped eating. He started drinking in the mornings. He sat in his heavy leather chair by the fire, staring at the flames, a bottle of rye whiskey on the table beside him. The house felt pressurized, as if the air itself was waiting to explode. Lila kept to the kitchen. She cooked meals that went uneaten. She kept the fire going. She locked her door every night and pushed a heavy chest against it, just in case. It was a Tuesday night when the wind rose to a howl, rattling the window panes in their frames. The house was dark, save for the flicker of the fire in the main room. Lila woke to the sound of crashing glass. She lay in her bed, her heart pounding. Silence followed. Then a groan. She knew she should stay in her room. She knew the safe thing was to pull the quilt over her head and wait for morning. But the silence stretched out, heavy and wrong. If he was hurt, if he had fallen into the fire, she needed the wages. She needed this roof. Lila got up. She pulled her shawl over her nightdress and took her small knife from under the pillow, slipping it into her pocket. She slid the bolt back quietly and stepped into the kitchen. The door to the main room was open. Silas was there. He had not fallen into the fire. He had thrown his glass against the stone hearth. He was standing in the center of the room, swaying slightly. The firelight cast long, twisted shadows across his face. He looked wrecked. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shirt unbuttoned, his hair wild. "Lila," he said. His voice was a slur, thick with drink and grief. "Go back to bed." "Silas," she said. She used his given name for the first time. It was a command, not a request. "You are drunk." "I am not drunk enough," he said. He took a step toward her. "The house is so quiet. Why is it so quiet?" "Because everyone is sleeping," she said. "As you should be." He looked at her, really looked at her, with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. It was a hunger for connection, for oblivion, for something warm to hold back the cold dark that was eating him alive. But mixed with the grief was that same look he had given the deputy, the look of a man who believes he owns the world around him. "You are here," he mumbled. "You are always here." He moved faster than a drunk man should. He closed the distance between them. Lila stepped back, but she hit the doorframe. "Silas, stop," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand went to the knife in her pocket. He reached out and took her shoulders. His hands were heavy, anchoring her. "You are a pretty thing, Lila, too pretty for this hard place. I am not yours. Silas, let me go. I just want—" He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. He smelled of whiskey and despair. "I just want to feel something other than this pain. That is not my burden to carry," Lila said. She pushed against his chest. He did not move. He was like a boulder. "Don't push me away," he whispered. "Not tonight." He tried to kiss her. It was a clumsy, desperate attempt. Lila turned her face away, and his mouth landed on her cheek. She shoved him hard, but he tightened his grip. The entitlement surged then, ugly and familiar. He was the boss. She was the help. She was the woman with no people, the stray he had taken in. "Don't fight me," he growled. "I need this." He shoved her back against the wall. The breath left her lungs. He pressed his hips against hers, his weight pinning her. One hand moved down her side, grasping at her waist, trying to pull her closer. It was a violation. It was a crossing of the line that could never be uncrossed. He was not asking. He was taking. Lila did not scream. She did not beg. The fury rose in her like a white-hot flame. It was the fury of every woman who had ever been told she was property. She pulled the knife. She did not stab him. She brought the handle down, hard, cracking it against his temple. Silas grunted and stumbled back, stunned. His grip loosened. Lila did not wait. She brought her knee up, driving it into his groin with all the strength of her work-hardened body. Silas doubled over, gasping, dropping to his knees. Lila stood over him, her chest heaving, the knife now blade forward in her hand. Her eyes were burning holes in the dark. "You do not take," she hissed. "You do not take what is not given." Silas looked up at her through the haze of pain and alcohol. He looked shocked. He looked like a man waking up from a dream to find his hands covered in blood. "Lila." "Wait," he wheezed. But Lila was already moving. She did not go to her room to pack. There was no time. She grabbed her heavy coat from the hook by the door. She grabbed a loaf of bread from the kitchen table. She opened the back door and the wind hit her, screaming like a banshee. It was freezing. The darkness was absolute. "Lila, don't!" Silas yelled from the floor, struggling to rise. "You will die out there. Better to die out there than live in here with you," she shouted back. She stepped out into the night. The cold was a physical blow. The wind tore at her shawl. She did not look back. She ran toward the dry wash, stumbling over the frozen sagebrush, her breath tearing at her throat. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook. She ran until the lights of the ranch house were swallowed by the dark. Inside the house, Silas Mercer pulled himself up using the table. He touched his temple where she had struck him. His fingers came away with a smear of blood. The house was silent again. The wind battered the walls. He stood there, swaying, the whiskey turning to ash in his mouth. He looked at his empty hands. He looked at the open door where the cold was pouring in. "God damn you," he whispered. But he was not cursing her. He was cursing himself. He had broken the only thing in the house that was whole. He had become the thing he hated. And now, somewhere out in the killing dark, Lila Reyes was running for her life. And it was his fault. The night did not want Lila Reyes to live. The wind that tore down the San Juan Basin was not merely moving air. It was a physical weight, a hammer made of ice and grit that pounded against the earth. Lila stumbled into the blackness, her boots sliding on loose shale, her breath freezing in her throat before she could even cough it out. She had no lantern. She had no horse. She had only the heavy wool coat she had snatched from the hook and the small paring knife pressed against her thigh inside her pocket. She ran until the lights of the Mercer Ranch were gone, swallowed by the rolling terrain. Then she walked until her legs felt like wood, numb and heavy. The sagebrush was cruel in the dark. Thorns tore at the hem of her dress and scratched deep lines into her ankles. Twice she fell, the hard ground knocking the wind out of her, scraping the skin from her palms. Each time, she lay there for a moment, listening to the coyotes yipping in the distance, sounding like laughing ghosts. It would be easy to stay down. It would be easy to let the cold sleep take her, but the fury in her belly was hotter than the frost. She pushed herself up. "I will not die for him," she whispered to the wind. "I will not die because a man could not master himself." She found a dry wash, an arroyo cut deep into the clay by summer floods. It offered a meager shelter from the biting wind. Lila huddled against the bank, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping the coat tight. She did not sleep. She watched the stars wheel overhead, cold and indifferent. She listened to the skitter of lizards and the distant hoot of an owl. She thought of Silas Mercer's face in the firelight, the hunger, the entitlement, the shock when she had struck him. She touched the pocket where the knife lay. She would use it again if she had to. Dawn broke gray and bleak, bleeding light over a landscape that looked like a bruise. Lila stood up. Her joints were stiff, her body aching as if she had been beaten. She ate half of the bread she had taken, the crust dry and hard, and began to walk toward the settlement of Aztec. It was 12 miles. She made it in 5 hours. Aztec was waking up when she limped onto the main street. It was not a welcoming place. It was a collection of rough buildings catering to miners, cattlemen, and drifters. Lila looked like a specter, hair wild, dress torn at the hem, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She went to the livery stable first, hoping to find work mucking stalls, anything to earn a coin for a stage ticket north. The livery owner, a man named Josiah with a face like a dried apple, looked her up and down. He spat a stream of tobacco juice near her boot. "I know you," he said. "You're the one working up at Mercer's place. I was—" Lila said. Her voice was rasping. "I am looking for day work. I need fare to Durango." Josiah leaned on his pitchfork. "Mercer run you off?" "I left." Josiah laughed. A dry, wheezing sound. A woman doesn't leave a warm house and good wages in winter unless she did something wrong, or unless she tried to get something she wasn't owed. I did nothing wrong, Lila said, her spine stiffening. That ain't how it looks, Josiah said. You look like trouble, and trouble brings the law. I don't hire trouble. Get on. Lila turned away, her face burning. She tried the general store. The wife of the owner blocked the doorway, crossing her arms over her chest. We heard, the woman said, news travels fast when a rider comes through for morning whiskey. They say you tempted him. They say you got wild when he didn't give you what you wanted. Lila stared at her. Who says this? Men, the woman sniffed. Men talk. You go on now. We don't serve your kind here. It was a wall of prejudice built on the solid foundation of believing that a powerful white rancher was incapable of sin, and a woman of mixed blood was incapable of virtue. Lila walked to the edge of the street, her hope thinning with the sunlight. Well, look at this. The voice was familiar. Lila turned to see Deputy Hatcher leaning against a hitching post. He was picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. He looked at her with a smug, predatory satisfaction. I told you, he said, I told you that you needed to learn your place. Looks like Mercer taught you the hard way. Lila gripped her coat. I am waiting for the stage. You got money for a ticket? Hatcher asked. Lila said nothing. That is what I thought, Hatcher said. He pushed off the post and walked toward her. The tin star on his chest caught the weak sun. In this town, if you don't have money and you don't have a roof, that is vagrancy. And if you took that coat from Mercer without his say-so, that is theft. I worked for that coat, Lila said. Hatcher smiled. It did not reach his eyes. That is for the law to decide. I could put you in a cell right now. Sheriff Brady likes a full jail. He gets paid by the county for every head, or... He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a murmur. Or you can be smart. You can keep your mouth shut about whatever happened up there. You don't make a fuss. You don't spread lies about a good man like Silas Mercer. You apologize to him if he comes for you, because if you don't, I will lock you up with the drunks and the rustlers. And I promise you, the nights in my jail are longer than the nights on the range. Lila looked at him. She saw the trap clearly. The law was not a shield. It was a weapon held in the hands of men who dined with Silas Mercer. I understand you, Deputy, Lila said. The words tasted like bile. Good, Hatcher said. Now, you wait here. If Mercer comes, you go with him. If he don't, well, then we talk about the vagrancy. Silas Mercer woke on the floor of his main room. The fire was dead ash. His head throbbed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, and his temple was tender to the touch. He sat up, and the memory of the night before hit him with the force of a physical blow. He groaned, covering his face with his hands. The smell of stale whiskey rose from his skin. He remembered the heat, the twisted logic of his grief, the feeling of entitlement that had surged through him. He remembered Lila's eyes, terrified, then furious. He remembered the knife. God help me, he whispered. He stood up, swaying. The house was silent. The door was still unlatched, swinging slightly in the draft. He walked to the kitchen. Her room was empty. The bed was made, but the pillow was dented. Her canvas bag was there. She had taken nothing but what she wore. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the hangover. It was 20 degrees outside. The wind had been a gale. Silas did not call for the hands. He did not want them to see him like this, and he did not want them to know what he had done. He grabbed his coat, jammed his hat on his head, and went to the barn. He saddled his big bay gelding with shaking hands. He rode out, head down, scanning the ground. The wind had scrubbed much of the earth clean, but the dry wash held secrets. He found a boot print in the clay. He found where she had slid, and then, caught on a snag of mesquite, he found a strip of wool from her shawl, and on the thorns of the bush, there was blood, bright, dried red against the brown dust. Silas stared at it. His stomach turned over. He had done this. He who prided himself on his control, on his endurance. He had driven a woman out into the killing cold because he could not handle his own emptiness. He spurred the horse. He rode hard, following the tracks where he could find them, guessing the line where he couldn't. He rode toward Aztec. He found her sitting on a crate behind the livery stable, out of the wind. She was wrapped in the coat, her arms around her knees. She looked up when he rode in. Her face was gray with fatigue, but her eyes were dry. There was no fear in them anymore, only a flat, hard reckoning. Silas dismounted. He felt sick with relief that she was alive, and sick with shame at the sight of her. He stopped 10 feet away. He took his hat off, twisting the brim in his hands. "Lila," he said. She did not stand. She looked at him as if he were a stranger she had no use for. "You are alive," he said. It was a stupid thing to say. "No thanks to you," she answered. Her voice was cracked. Silas looked down at his boots. I was drunk. I was not myself." Lila stood up then. She moved slowly, her body stiff, but she stood tall. "Do not lie to me, Silas Mercer. You were exactly yourself. The drink just took away the mask. You thought because you pay me, you own me. You thought because you are sad, you have the right to take comfort where you find it. It was wrong," Silas said. The words felt inadequate. "Small. I am sorry. Sorry is a word," Lila said. "It does not put warmth back in my blood. It does not heal the cuts on my feet." Silas reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out a heavy leather pouch. It clinked with the sound of gold coins. "I will pay you," he said. "I will give you 3 months' wages. I will buy you a ticket to wherever you want to go. Denver, Santa Fe. You can start over." Lila looked at the money. Then she looked at his face. Her expression curled into scorn. "You think you can buy your conscience clean?" she asked. "You think if I take your money and leave, you can go back to being the good, suffering widower? I want to help you," Silas said. "You want to help yourself," she snapped. "If I leave, the story leaves with me. If I take your money, I am just a whore you paid off." She took a step toward him. "I will not be paid for my silence, Silas, and I will not be run off by a man who cannot control his hands." Silas looked at her, stunned. "What do you want, then?" Lila looked past him, toward the town where the deputy waited, where the women whispered, where the doors were closed to her. She looked back at the harsh, open country that wanted to kill her. She had no good choices. She had only survival. "I want my job," she said. "I want my wages, the ones I earn, and I want terms." "Terms?" Silas asked. "I will cook, I will mend, but I will sleep in the tack room at the barn. I will put a lock on the inside that only you have the key to. You will never step foot in that room. You will never touch me again. If you come near me with drink on your breath, I will put a knife in your ribs. And next time, I will not use the handle." Silas swallowed. He saw the steel in her. He saw that she was cornering him, forcing him to look at what he was. "And," she continued, "if I ever want to leave, you will give me a horse and a saddle, and you will not follow me." Silas nodded slowly. "Agreed. And one more thing," Lila said. "When there is business in town, you speak for me. You tell them I am a respectable woman. You tell them I am under your protection, not as your property, but as your employee. You clean up the mess your name has made of mine." Silas closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the weight of it. It was a penance. It was a daily reminder of his failure. Living right there on his ranch. "Agreed," he said. The ride back to the ranch was silent. When they arrived, the sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the valley. The crew was gathering for supper. They stopped when they saw the wagon. Lila climbed down, stiff and sore. Dutch was leaning against the bunkhouse. He smirked. "Back so soon? Couldn't find a better bed?" Silas stepped down from the wagon. He walked over to Dutch. He did not shout. He spoke in a voice that was low and vibrating with a suppressed violence. "Lila is the head of the house staff," Silas said. "You will speak to her with respect. If I hear a word otherwise, one word, Dutch, you will be walking to Mexico. Do you understand?" Dutch's smirk vanished. He looked at Silas's face. then at the bruise on his temple. "Yeah, boss, I understand." Silas turned to the rest of the crew. "That goes for all of you." He looked at Lila. She did not smile. She took her bag and walked toward the barn, her head high. That night, Silas did not sleep in his house. He took a bedroll and slept on the back porch. In the cold, he poured the remaining bottles of whiskey into the dirt. It was not a performance. It was a necessity. He could not trust himself in that house yet. He needed the cold to keep him awake, to keep him aware. The routine returned, but it was changed. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was charged with a heavy, brittle awareness. Lila moved her things into the tack room. She installed a heavy padlock. She cooked the meals, set the table, and left before Silas sat down. November turned into December. The snows came, dusting the valley floor in white. The work was hard. The cattle needed feed brought to them. The ice on the tanks had to be broken twice a day. But the ranch was not the only thing changing. The valley was tightening. Cattle started disappearing. Not just strays wandering off, but bunches of 10 or 20 cut from the herd with precision. Brands were being altered. Fences were being cut. One afternoon, Sheriff Brady rode into the Mercer yard. He was a big man, soft in the middle but hard in the eyes. He rode a fine black horse that looked too expensive for a sheriff's salary. Silas met him on the porch. Lila was in the yard, plucking a chicken for stew. She froze when she saw the sheriff, but she did not run. She watched. "Afternoon. Silas," Brady said, not dismounting. "Sheriff," Silas said. "To what do I owe the visit?" "Just making rounds," Brady said. "Hearing things. Heard you had a little domestic trouble a while back. That little filly over there run off and come back?" Silas crossed his arms. "Lila works here. There was no trouble." Brady leaned over his saddle horn. "See, that is not what I hear. I hear stories. People talk about the nature of the relationship. It is unseemly, Silas, a man of your standing, living alone with a woman of her background. It makes the town nervous. Let them be nervous." Silas said, "I run a ranch, not a church social." Brady smiled. It was a snake's smile. "Well, scandals can be messy. They can affect business. Banks get jittery. Buyers look elsewhere. But, of course, a man with friends in the law, well, those stories can be hush-hushed. For a donation to the sheriff's benevolent fund." Silas stared at him. "It was a shakedown. Pure and simple. I have no money for donations. Brady, I have cattle to feed." Brady straightened up. His face hardened. "That is a shame. I would hate to see you have trouble with those rustlers working the basin, without the law looking out for you. A man can lose a lot." He tipped his hat to Lila. "Ma'am, be careful out here. It is a dangerous world." He rode off. Lila walked over to the porch. She looked at Silas. "He is threatening you," she said. "He is squeezing me," Silas corrected. "He wants a cut, and he is using you as the lever." Lila looked at the dust settling behind the sheriff's horse. "If we stay silent, he wins. If we hide, he wins." "What do you propose?" Silas asked. He sounded tired. Lila wiped her hands on her apron. "We write it down. Every time he comes. Every time a cow goes missing. Every time the deputy threatens someone. We keep a ledger." "A ledger?" Silas asked. "Memory fades." Lila said, "Ink does not. If he comes for us, we need proof that he is a crook, not a lawman." Silas looked at her. He saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She was not just surviving anymore. She was strategizing. "There is a book in the desk," he said. "Use it." 2 weeks later, the sky turned a bruised purple in the middle of the afternoon. The air grew heavy and still. A winter storm was rolling in, fast and violent. Silas was out at the North Line camp, 10 miles away. He had taken the wagon to bring salt licks to the herd there. He should have been back by noon. Lila watched the sky. The first flakes began to fall, huge and wet. Within an hour, it was a whiteout. The wind screamed, driving the snow sideways. The hands were all in the bunkhouse, playing cards, safe and warm. Lila stood on the porch, wrapped in her coat. He wasn't back. She went to the bunkhouse. Dutch opened the door. Silas isn't back, Lila said. Dutch shrugged. He's a big boy. He probably holed up at the line shack. He took the wagon, Lila said. The trail to the line shack washes out in heavy weather. If he is on the trail, he is in trouble. We ain't going out in this. Old Pete said. You can't see your hand in front of your face. Lila looked at them. Cowards, she thought. She went to the barn. She saddled the mare she had calmed months ago. She grabbed a coil of rope, a lantern, and a flask of brandy. She tied her scarf over her face. She rode out into the white hell. The trekking was impossible. She had to trust the mare and her own memory of the land. She rode for 2 hours, the cold seeping into her marrow. The world was a swirling void of white. She found him 3 miles from the ranch. The wagon had slid off the trail where the ground had given way into a ravine. It was tipped on its side. The mules were tangled in the traces, panic-stricken. Silas was pinned under the wagon seat, half buried in the snow. Silas, she screamed over the wind. He did not answer. Lila dismounted. The snow was waist-deep in the ravine. She fought her way to the wagon. Silas was unconscious, a gash on his forehead bleeding sluggishly. His leg was trapped under the heavy oak seat. Lila didn't panic. She worked. She used her knife to cut the traces, freeing the mules so they wouldn't thrash and crush him further. She took the rope and tied it to the wagon frame, then tied the other end to her mare's saddle horn. Pull, she yelled, slapping the mare's rump. The horse strained. The rope sang tight. The wagon groaned and lifted just 3 inches. It was enough. Lila grabbed Silas by the coat and dragged him backward, her boots slipping in the mud and ice. He groaned as she pulled him free. She checked him quickly. Leg broken. Likely. Head injury. Hypothermia setting in. She couldn't get him onto the horse. She couldn't walk him. She looked around. There was a small overhang of rock nearby. Shelter from the wind. She dragged him there. She gathered deadwood from a twisted juniper, stripping the bark with numb fingers. She built a fire, shielding the spark with her own body until it caught. She poured the brandy down his throat. She huddled next to him, sharing her body heat, covering them both with the horse blankets she had stripped from the mare. Silas woke an hour later. He looked at the fire, then at Lila. His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak. You came. You were late, she said. Her voice was flat, but her hands were tucking the blanket tighter around him. I thought I was dead. You nearly were. The wagon wheel snapped. Silas looked at her. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the ice in her eyebrows. He saw that she had risked her life for him, the man who had assaulted her, the man who had driven her away. Why? He whispered. Because I need the wages, Lila said, and because I am not a murderer. They sat in silence for a long time. The storm raged outside their small bubble of warmth. Lila, Silas said. His voice was stronger now. About that night. Don't, she said. I have to, he said. I have to say it. I was a monster. I let my grief turn into something ugly. I blamed the world for my pain, and I took it out on you. Lila stared into the fire. I am trying to change, Silas said. I am trying to be the man I was before, or a better one. Lila looked at him. The firelight softened the harsh lines of his face. He looked broken. He looked human. An apology is a start. Silas, she said quietly, it is not an ending. You don't get a medal for stopping being cruel. You just get to call yourself a man again. I know, he said. They survived the night. In the morning, the storm broke. The hands came looking when the sun rose. Shamed into action by Lila's empty room. They found them and brought them home. Silas's leg was splinted. He was confined to the house. Lila went back to her work, but something had shifted. It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a soft thing, and there was no softness here yet. But it was a truce. Lila sat in her tack room that night, the ledger open on her knees. She wrote down the date. She wrote down the incident with the sheriff. She wrote down the wagon accident. She looked at her reflection in the small piece of mirror she had tacked to the wall. She was tired. She was lonely. But she was here. She had not been erased. She had not been owned. She closed the book. She would stay. She would survive. And she would wait to see what kind of man Silas Mercer would actually become. The winter in the San Juan Basin did not end. It merely retreated into the mud. The snow melted into a thick, clinging gumbo that coated boots, wagon wheels, and the bellies of the horses. March arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum and wind that smelled of wet sage and thawing earth. Lila Reyes moved through the days with a rhythm born of necessity. She woke before the sun, the air in her small tack room still holding the bite of the night. She broke the ice on the washing basin, dressed in the dark, and walked across the yard to the main house. The mud sucked at her boots with every step, a constant reminder that the land wanted to pull her down. Her hands were never idle, and they were never clean. They were red from scrubbing linens in boiling water, calloused from chopping kindling, and stained with the grease of the cook stove. But they were steady. Inside the house, the tension was a living thing. It sat at the table with them during meals. It stood in the corners of the room when the lamps were lit. Silas Mercer moved with a limp, his leg healing but stiff from the wagon accident in the storm. He was a large man, and his presence filled a room, but he had learned to make himself small when she was near. He no longer walked up behind her. He made his footsteps heavy on the floorboards so she would hear him coming. If she was in the pantry, he waited in the kitchen until she emerged. He did not speak to her unless it was about work, and when he did, he looked at her eyes, not her hands, not her neck. It was a discipline. Lila could see the effort it cost him. She saw his jaw tighten when he wanted to shout at a clumsy ranch hand, but held his tongue. She saw his hands curl into fists at his sides, then deliberately open, finger by finger. He was wrestling with something dark inside him, wrestling it down like a steer in the branding chute. Lila had her own ghosts. She slept with the lamp burning low in her tack room, the oil costing her a portion of her wages. But the darkness was too full of memories to endure. She woke often, her heart hammering against her ribs, the phantom sensation of weight pressing her into a mattress. She would sit up, gasping, her hand flying to the knife she kept beneath her pillow. One afternoon, a wagon rattled into the yard. It was driven by a woman wrapped in a buffalo coat, her face weathered like old saddle leather. This was Martha Gable, a widow who ran the Box Elder spread 10 miles to the east. She had buried 2 husbands and 3 children, and the valley said she had tears left for none of them. Lila was on the porch, sweeping the mud that the men had tracked in. She paused, tightening her grip on the broom handle. Visitors usually meant judgment. Mrs. Gable climbed down, tying her team with efficient, sharp movements. She stomped her boots and looked at Lila. "You are the Reyes girl." "Mrs." Gable stated. It was not a question. "I am Lila," she answered. "Mrs." Gable nodded once. I heard. The wind carries voices in this valley, even when you don't want it to." "Is Silas about?" "He is in the barn." Lila said, "Mrs." Gable stepped onto the porch. She did not go in. She stood next to Lila, looking out at the gray horizon. "This country eats the soft parts of a person first." "Mrs." Gable said. Her voice was like dry leaves. "It eats the hope, then the kindness. If you are not careful, it leaves you with nothing but the hunger." Lila looked at her. The older woman's eyes were sharp, blue, and unblinking. There was no pity in them, but there was recognition. "I am not soft," Lila said. "Mrs." Gable looked at Lila's hands, then at the knife sheath that was just visible at her waist. "No," the widow said. "I can see that. Keep your blade sharp, girl, and keep your heart quiet. The men here, they break things because they do not know how to fix them. Even the good ones have clumsy hands." She walked past Lila into the house without knocking. It was the first time a woman in the valley had spoken to Lila without a sneer or a whisper. It was a small thing, a fragile alliance, but it felt like solid ground. Silas sat in his study, the ledger open before him. The numbers were grim. The winter had been hard on the herd, and the rustlers were bleeding him dry. 5 head here, 10 head there. It was a slow hemorrhage. But it was not the cattle that kept him awake. It was the man he saw in the mirror. He remembered his father, a man named Jedediah Mercer, who had believed that love was a form of ownership. Jedediah had struck his wife when she spoke out of turn. He had struck Silas when he showed fear. He had taught Silas that a man's will was law, and that anything that resisted that law was to be broken. Silas had hated him. He had sworn, standing over his father's grave, that he would be different. He had been gentle with his wife, Sarah, before the fever took her. He had been a good man. And then, one night, fueled by whiskey and self-pity, he had become Jedediah. The shame was a cold stone in his gut. It was not the shame of being caught. It was the shame of knowing that the monster was not outside, but in his own blood. He watched Lila move through the yard, her head high, her walk guarded. She was a constant reminder of his failure. He had to learn restraint. It was not enough to be sorry. He had to rebuild his own nature. He forced himself to stop drinking. When the urge to command rose in his throat, he swallowed it. When he wanted to grab a frightened horse, he forced his hands to be still. It was exhausting. It felt like holding a dam against a flood. Late one Tuesday in April, the violence of the land came to their doorstep. It was 2 hours past midnight. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds. Lila was awake, mending a shirt by the light of her lantern, when the first shot cracked the silence. It was followed by shouting, the thunder of hooves, and the terrified bawling of cattle. Lila blew out the lantern instantly. She pulled on her boots and grabbed her coat. She did not hide. The ranch was her livelihood, and fire or theft would leave her starving just as surely as it would Silas. She ran out into the yard. The darkness was chaos. Flashes of muzzle fire lit up the corrals. Riders were driving a knot of 30 steers toward the broken south gate. Silas was already there, shouting orders. He was bareheaded, his rifle in his hand, limping but moving with a terrible purpose. Dutch and old Pete were firing from the cover of the water trough. "Get to the bunkhouse," Silas roared at a shadow moving near the barn. But the shadow crumpled. A young hand, a boy named Jimmy, who had only joined them a month ago, went down with a high, thin scream. Lila did not think. She ran. She kept low, sprinting across the open ground while bullets buzzed through the air like angry hornets. She reached Jimmy and grabbed him by the collar of his coat. He was thrashing, clutching his thigh. "Help me!" he shrieked. "Quiet!" Lila hissed. She dragged him. She was not a large woman, but years of lifting sacks of flour and cast-iron pots had given her a deceptive strength. She hauled him behind the heavy oak slats of the feed bin. The rustlers were turning, firing back to cover their escape. A bullet splintered the wood inches from Lila's face. She did not flinch. She tore her petticoat, ripping the fabric with her teeth. Jimmy was bleeding dark and fast. The bullet had taken him in the meat of the leg, missing the bone but hitting a vessel. "Hold this," Lila ordered, pressing a wad of cloth into the wound. "Push down. Hard." She took her belt off and cinched it around his thigh, above the wound. She twisted it tight with a piece of kindling she grabbed from the dirt. Jimmy sobbed, his face pale in the darkness. "Look at me," Lila said, her voice iron hard. "You are not going to die tonight. Jimmy, I will not allow it. Breathe." The boy looked at her, terrified, and nodded. He breathed. The shooting tapered off. The rustlers, having taken what they could, vanished into the black mouth of the canyon. The silence that followed was heavy with the smell of gunpowder and dust. Silas came limping over. He had his Winchester in one hand. He looked down at Lila, who was kneeling in the mud, her hands covered in Jimmy's blood, her face streaked with dirt. She was checking the tourniquet, her movements precise and calm. She looked up and met his gaze. In that moment, there was no employer and employee, no victim and aggressor. There were only two people who had survived the dark. "He will live," Lila said, "but he needs a doctor. The bleeding is slowed, but the bullet is deep." Silas nodded. "I will send Dutch to town for Dr. Aris." He hesitated. He looked at her hands, stained red. "You did well, Lila." Lila wiped her hands on her apron. "He is just a boy," she said. He does not deserve to bleed for cows. 2 hours later, the ranch was quiet again, though no one slept. Dr. Harris had arrived, removed the bullet, and left Jimmy sleeping under a haze of laudanum in the bunkhouse. Lila was in the kitchen, scrubbing the blood from the floorboards where they had carried Jimmy in. The water in the bucket was pink. Silas walked in. He looked exhausted. His face was gray, the lines around his mouth deep. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one on the table near her, but not too close. He leaned against the counter, nursing his own cup. "They took 40 head, Silas said. "That is the 3rd time this month." Lila wrung out the rag. "They know the ranch is weak," she said. "They know the sheriff looks the other way." Silas looked into his coffee. "I know." He was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice rough. "Doctor, Harris is still here. He is checking on old Pete's cough." Lila did not look up. "Why do you tell me this?" "Because I spoke to him," Silas said, before he looked at Pete. "I told him." Lila stopped scrubbing. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Told him what?" Silas met her eyes. It was hard for him. She could see the shame burning in him. But he held her gaze. "I told him what happened in November. I told him that I forced myself on you. I told him that I assaulted a woman under my protection." Lila stood up slowly. The water dripped from the rag onto the floor. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you give them a weapon to destroy you?" "Because," Silas said, setting his cup down, "you said an apology is not an ending. You were right. Accountability means the truth is known by men who matter. Doctor, Harris is a good man. He is a witness." "What did he say?" Lila asked. "He said that in a just world, I would be in a cell. He said he was disappointed in me. He said he would not report it to the sheriff because the sheriff is corrupt and would only use it to hurt you, but he wrote it down in his medical log. It is a matter of record now." Silas took a breath. "If we go to court against the sheriff or the rustlers, and they try to use lies against you, the truth is already there. I did it. I own it. They cannot blackmail a man who has already confessed." Lila stared at him. It was a strategic move. Yes, but it was also a suicide of his reputation. In this valley, a man's standing was his currency. He had just devalued himself to protect her from future leverage. "You are a fool." "Silas Mercer," she said softly. "Maybe," he said, "but I am not my father." The reaction in town was slow but poisonous. Doctor. Harris kept his confidence, but secrets in the West were like water. They found the cracks. The men in the saloon slapped Silas on the back a little harder, their eyes knowing and conspiratorial, assuming he had handled the situation like a man. They protected him because to condemn him would be to condemn their own secret sins. The women were crueler. When Lila went to the mercantile to buy thread, the whispers stopped when she entered. They watched her. They did not see a victim. They saw a temptation. They saw a woman who had brought disorder to a widower's house. But Lila found she cared less about their whispers. She had saved a boy's life. She had stood in the gunfire. She felt a dangerous thing growing in her chest, a desire to be seen. Not as a scandal, not as a servant, but as a force. She began to wear her hair differently, not hidden under a scarf, but braided high and proud. She walked down the center of the boardwalk, not the edge. When Silas spoke to her, she answered him with a level voice, demanding to be heard. The dynamic in the house shifted further. It became a dance of high stakes. One evening, Silas came to the door of the kitchen while she was kneading dough. "Lila," he said. She turned. "Yes, may I come in?" he asked. He stood at the threshold, his boots on the line where the wood changed from the hallway to the kitchen. Lila looked at him. He waited. He would stand there all night if she did not answer. "You may," she said. He stepped in. "I need to discuss the supplies for the roundup. I want your opinion on the rations." "My opinion?" Lila asked. "Since when do you ask the cook for advice on cattle work?" "Since the cook showed she has more sense in a crisis than my foreman," Silas said. He laid the list on the table. He stood next to her, looking at the paper. He was close. She could smell the soap he used, the scent of tobacco and pine. It was not unpleasant. Lila felt a sudden, sharp spike of heat in her belly. It shocked her. It was not fear. It was a yearning. It was the body's treacherous memory that beneath the violence, there was a man who was strong, and she was a woman who had been alone in the cold for a very long time. She pointed to the list. "You need more dried fruit," she said, her voice steady. "The men get sick without it." "And more coffee?" Silas nodded. He did not move away. He watched her finger trace the lines on the paper. "Thank you," he said. He turned and left. He did not linger. He did not try to touch her. The restraint was palpable. It vibrated in the air like a plucked string. A week later, Lila fell ill. It was a fever, sudden and fierce, born of exhaustion and the damp spring air. She lay in her tack room, shivering under 3 blankets, her teeth chattering. Silas found her when she did not appear for breakfast. He knocked on the door. "Lila?" "Go away," she croaked. He did not go away. He broke the rule. He opened the door, but he brought Mrs. Gable with him. "I brought Martha," Silas said, standing in the doorway, refusing to cross the threshold alone. "She will tend to you." Lila drifted in and out of sleep for 2 days. When she woke, the fever had broken. It was night. The room was dim. Mrs. Gable had gone home to her own stock. Silas was sitting on a crate near the door. He was whittling a piece of wood, the shavings curling onto the floor. He looked up when she stirred. "You are awake," he said softly. "Water," she whispered. He stood and brought the dipper to her lips. He supported her head with one hand. His hand was large, rough, and incredibly gentle. He held her as if she were made of glass. He lowered her back down. "I thought you might die," he said. His voice was stark. "Would you care?" Lila asked. "Yes," he said. "I would care very much." Lila looked at him. The fever had burned away some of her walls. She felt raw. She felt the terrible loneliness of her life. "Silas," she said. He leaned closer. "I am here." Lila reached out. Her hand trembled. She touched his wrist. It was a test. It was a question. She wanted to know if he was safe. She wanted to know if she could touch a man without being destroyed. Silas froze. He looked down at her hand on his skin. He did not grab it. He did not move. He stopped breathing. Lila let her hand slide up his forearm, feeling the muscle beneath the shirt. She rested her fingers there for a heartbeat. Then she pulled away. She retreated under the quilt. Silas let out a long, shaky breath. He put his hands on his knees. "Rest, Lila," he said. He stood up and walked out, closing the door behind him. He did not take what was offered. He did not mistake her vulnerability for an invitation. He passed the test. Spring turned to early summer. The grass grew green and thick. The cattle fattened. The rustler attack stopped for a time, as if the valley was holding its breath. The evening of the summer solstice was warm. The sun hung on the horizon, painting the sky in riotous oranges and pinks. Lila was sitting on the porch swing, mending a bridle. Silas sat on the steps, smoking a pipe. It was a domestic scene, peaceful and deceptive. "The sheriff came by today," Silas said. Lila looked up. "I saw him. He offered to buy the south pasture," Silas said, "for 1/10 of what it is worth. He said it would help pay for protection. He is tightening the screws." Lila said, "Yes." Silas turned to look at her. The smoke from his pipe curled blue in the air. "I am not going to sell," he said. "I am going to fight him, but it will get ugly. I know," Lila said. Silas stood up. He walked up the steps and stood near the swing. He put his pipe down on the railing. "Lila," he said. She stopped sewing. She looked at him. The air between them changed. It became heavy, charged with the months of silence, the months of shared survival, the months of improving, day by day, that he could be different. He looked at her mouth. Then he looked at her eyes. He waited. He was asking. Lila felt her heart hammer. She was terrified, but she was also furious at her own fear. She was tired of being afraid. She wanted to claim this. She wanted to choose. "If I say stop, you stop," she said. Her voice was clear. Instantly. Silas said, "If I step back, you do not follow." I will be a statue, he promised. Lila stood up. She was close to him now. She could see the gray in his beard, the scar on his temple where she had struck him. She took a step forward. She placed her hands on his chest. He was solid, warm. His heart was beating as fast as hers. She tilted her head up. Silas lowered his head slowly. He gave her every second to pull away. He gave her 1,000 chances to say no. She did not pull away. His lips touched hers. It was not a devourer's kiss. It was hesitant, almost shy. It was a question asked in the language of breath and skin. Is this allowed? Is this real? Lila closed her eyes. She pressed back, just a little. Silas made a low sound in his throat, a sound of relief and longing, and deepened the kiss. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He held her as if she were the only holy thing in a godless country. For a moment, the ranch, the sheriff, the rustlers, and the ghosts of the past fell away. There was only the heat of him, the smell of tobacco, and the roughness of his beard against her skin. Then Lila stepped back. Silas stopped. Immediately. His hands fell to his sides. He did not chase her. He stood where he was, his chest heaving, his eyes dark and wide. "Thank you," Lila whispered. She did not say it for the kiss. She said it for the stop. Silas nodded. He looked like a man who had seen a miracle. "Good night, Lila," he said. "Good night, Silas." She walked into the house, to her room. She did not lock the door that night. She slid the bolt, but she did not feel the need to push the heavy chest against it. Outside, Silas sat on the steps again. He picked up his pipe, but it had gone out. He watched the stars come out over the mountains. The danger was still there. The sheriff was still coming. The rustlers were still circling. But something had changed. The rot in the center of the ranch had been cut out. Something new was growing in the scar tissue. It was fragile, green, and unlikely. But it was honest, and in the high, unforgiving country of the West, honesty was the only weapon that never ran out of ammunition. The month of July fell upon the San Juan Basin like a heavy wool blanket soaked in boiling water. The heat was not merely a temperature, it was a presence. It shimmered off the hard-pan clay, distorting the horizon, and sucked the moisture from the creek beds until the earth cracked open in jagged fissures. The wind, usually a torment, died away, leaving a stillness that felt like a held breath before a scream. Lila Reyes rode into town on the buckboard wagon, sitting stiffly beside Silas. They had come for flour, coffee, and salt, the necessities that the ranch could not produce. Silas held the reins, his eyes scanning the road ahead. He wore his revolver on his hip now, openly displayed. The truce with the valley was fraying, the silence stretching thin. When they pulled up to the Mercantile, the street was quiet. Men sat on the boardwalks, whittling or smoking, but their hands stilled when they saw Lila. The eyes that followed her were not just wary anymore. They were hard, shiny with a malice that had been baking in the heat. "You stay here," Silas said, setting the brake. "I will load the sacks." "No," Lila said. She smoothed her skirt. "I am not a fugitive. I will select the coffee myself." Silas looked at her, seeing the stubborn set of her jaw. He nodded once. "As you wish." They entered the store. The air inside was stifling, smelling of dry grain and vinegar. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, was behind the counter, weighing nails for a farmer. He looked up, his face, usually a mask of polite indifference, hardened into stone. Lila walked to the shelf where the coffee tins were stacked. She reached for a red tin. "Don't touch that," Henderson said. Lila paused, her hand hovering. "Excuse me?" "I said don't touch it," Henderson snapped. He wiped his hands on his apron. "I don't want your hands on my goods. I have decent customers who don't want to buy what a woman like you has handled." The store went silent. The farmer backed away, looking at the floor. Lila turned slowly. "A woman like me? A woman who brings trouble," Henderson said, his voice rising. "A woman who bewitches a man in his grief and turns him against his own neighbors. You are bad luck, girl. You are poison in the well." Lila stood tall, though her knees trembled beneath her skirts. "My money is the same color as anyone else's. Mr. Henderson, your money is dirty," a voice said from the doorway. It was Deputy Hatcher. He stepped inside, blocking the light. He hooked his thumbs in his gun belt, a smirk playing on his lips. "We don't want your trade here," Hatcher said. "In fact, we don't want you here at all. You are disturbing the peace just by walking down the street." Lila looked from the shopkeeper to the deputy. She saw the trap closing. It was not just dislike. It was an eviction. "I will leave when I have purchased my goods," Lila said. She reached for the coffee tin again. Hatcher moved fast. He crossed the floor and shoved her, hard. Lila stumbled back, crashing into a display of brooms. The tin clattered to the floor, rolling away. "I said get out," Hatcher shouted. "You should be on your knees thanking us we don't tar and feather you for what you are doing to this town." Lila caught her balance, her breath hitching. The violence of the shove shocked her. Then a shadow fell over Hatcher. Silas had been looking at harness leather in the back. Now he was there, and he looked like a mountain about to slide. He did not shout. He did not draw his gun. He simply stepped between Lila and the deputy, his chest inches from Hatcher's face. "Touch her again," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "And you will not have hands to touch anything ever again." Hatcher stepped back, his hand twitching near his holster. "You are threatening an officer of the law." "Mercer, I am threatening a bully," Silas said. He turned to Henderson, who was cowering behind his counter. "So her money is dirty?" Silas asked. Henderson swallowed. "Now, Silas, you know how people talk. I have a business to run. I can't have her." "Fine," Silas said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of silver dollars, the payment for the month's large order of grain and tools. He looked at the coins. Then he threw them on the floor. They scattered, rolling into the dust and the cracks in the floorboards. "If she cannot buy here, neither can I," Silas said, "and neither will anyone who works for me. You just lost the Mercer account, Henderson, permanently." Silas took Lila's arm. His grip was firm but protective. "Come." They walked out into the blinding sun. The men on the boardwalk stood up as they passed. "You are making a mistake. Silas!" Hatcher yelled after them. "You are choosing a whore over your own people." Silas stopped. He turned slowly. "She is not a whore," he said, his voice carrying down the street. "She is a woman of worth. And if this is what my people are, then I am glad to be a stranger." He helped Lila into the wagon and snapped the reins. They drove out of town, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence that felt like the precursor to war. The ride back was long. The heat pressed down on them. Lila looked at her hands, folded in her lap. They were shaking. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. "You need the supplies. You need the town. I need my soul more," Silas said, staring at the mule's ears. "They will destroy you for this," Lila said. "They will cut you off. They will whisper until the bank calls your loans." "Let them," Silas said. "A man who stands with jackals just to eat their scraps is no man at all." They turned up the long road to the ranch house. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody streaks across the sky. The air smelled of smoke, not wood smoke, but something sharper. "Something is wrong," Silas said, straightening. The gate to the home pasture was open. The milk cow was wandering on the road. The silence of the ranch was absolute. There was no sound of the dinner bell, no clatter of the cook stove. Silas whipped the mules into a run. They clattered into the yard. The bunkhouse door was swinging in the wind. The water trough had been overturned. The ground turned to mud. Dutch came stumbling out of the barn. He was holding his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. "Boss," he croaked. Silas leaped from the wagon, forgetting his bad leg. "Dutch, what happened? They came about an hour ago." Dutch gasped. 5 of them, masked, said they were looking for rustled beef. They tore the place apart. "Where is Jimmy?" Lila asked, her heart stopping. Dutch looked at the ground. He pointed toward the corral. Lila ran. She did not feel her feet touch the ground. She ran to the corral fence where the horses were milling nervously. Jimmy was there, the boy she had saved from the bullet, the boy who had just started to walk without a crutch. He was lying in the dust, his arms spread wide. A single bullet hole was in the center of his chest. Pinned to his shirt with a knife was a piece of paper. Lila fell to her knees. She did not scream. The sound that came from her throat was a low, keening wail that tore at the air. Silas reached her a moment later. He saw the boy. He saw the note. He pulled the knife free and read the scrawled words. "Bad company brings bad luck." It was not a rustler's note. It was a message from the sheriff, delivered by his shadow men. Silas crumpled the paper in his fist. He looked at the dead boy, then at Lila, who was rocking back and forth, her hands covering her face. "He did nothing," Lila sobbed. "He was a child. He was innocent." Silas dropped to his knees beside her. He pulled her into his chest. She fought him for a second, hitting his shoulders, needing to hit something, but he held her tight until the fight went out of her and she collapsed against him. "I know," he whispered into her hair. "I know." That night, the ranch was a place of mourning and cold rage. They washed Jimmy's body and laid him out on the dining table, covering him with a clean sheet. The remaining hands, Dutch and old Pete, sat on the porch with shotguns across their knees, their faces grim. Silas and Lila sat in the study. A single lamp burned. A bottle of whiskey sat on the desk. "Unopened." Silas stared at it, his hands clenched. "Drink it if you need to," Lila said. Her voice was hollow. "No," Silas said. "If I drink, I will ride into town and kill Hatcher tonight, and then they will hang me, and you will be alone. I cannot afford to be drunk." He looked at her. Her eyes were dry now, dark and terrifyingly empty. "This is my fault," she said. "No," Silas said sharply. "Do not say that. It is. If I had left that first night, if I had frozen to death in the wash, Jimmy would be alive. You would still have your friends. You would be dead," Silas said. "And I would be a murderer." He stood up and paced the room. The shadows stretched and twisted. "My father," he began, his voice rasping. "Jedediah. He used to beat his dogs when they didn't come to his whistle. He beat my mother when she burned the bread. He told me that everything under his roof was his to break. He said love was just a pretty word for ownership." He stopped at the window, looking out into the black night. When I came at you in November," Silas said, turning to face her, "I felt him in me. I felt that same sickness, that belief that because I was strong and you were there, I had a right." He looked at his hands. "I have spent every day since then trying to kill him inside me. But today I saw that the whole world is full of Jedediahs. Hatcher, Brady. They think power gives them the right to take life, to take dignity." Lila looked at him. She saw the torture in his face. She stood up and walked to him. "I was 12 when my uncle traded me to a trapper for 3 horses and a rifle," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy and brutal. Silas went still. "The trapper used me for a winter," Lila said. She did not look away. She spoke the words like she was reciting a list of groceries. "He told me I was nothing but a warm place to sleep. He reduced me to meat. I ran away in the spring. When the snow melted, I have been running ever since, running from men who look at me and see a thing, not a person." She took a breath. "I stayed here, Silas, because after that first night, you stopped looking at me like meat. You looked at me like I was dangerous, like I was real." Silas looked at her with a profound sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Lila." "Do not be sorry," she said. "Be angry." The air between them crackled. It was not the anger of conflict. It was the shared heat of 2 people who had been burned by the same fire. Lila stepped closer. The grief was a cavern inside her, and she needed to feel something other than the cold. She reached out and placed a hand on his chest. "Silas," she whispered. She leaned into him. He wrapped his arms around her. "Careful, so careful." She buried her face in his neck, smelling the sweat and the dust. She wanted to be held. She wanted to be found. She lifted her face. He kissed her. It was desperate, salty with tears. For a moment, she let herself fall into it. She pressed her body against his, needing the weight, the solidity, but as his hand moved to her waist, as his grip tightened just a fraction, a memory flashed in her mind, the trapper, the heavy weight, the lack of air. She froze. Her body went rigid as a board. A small, sharp gasp escaped her throat. Silas stopped. He did not just pause, he arrested all motion. He pulled his mouth away. He lifted his hands from her body as if she were burning hot. He stepped back, putting 3 feet of space between them. "Lila," he said. His voice was calm, though his chest was heaving. Lila stood there, trembling, waiting for the anger, waiting for the demand. "Why did you start it if you won't finish it?" But Silas just stood there. He looked at her with concern, not frustration. "It is all right," he said gently. "You are safe. I am here. I am not him." Lila stared at him. The panic receded, replaced by a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly buckled her knees. He had stopped. He had respected the line without question. "Thank you," she whispered. Silas nodded. He poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the sideboard and handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers. Light and cool. "Go to sleep." "Lila," he said, "we have a war to fight tomorrow." The war arrived 2 days later in the form of Sheriff Brady. He rode into the yard with 4 men, deputies, all heavily armed. They did not dismount. They sat on their horses, a wall of badges and guns. Silas walked out onto the porch. He held his Winchester loosely in the crook of his arm. Lila stood in the doorway behind him, her hand on the frame. "Sheriff," Silas said, "you are on my land, investigating a murder." "Silas," Brady said. His voice was smooth, oily. "Terrible thing about that boy. Truly terrible." "We know who did it," Silas said. "And so do you," Brady chuckled. "See, that is where we disagree. I have a witness who says they saw a woman fitting the description of your housekeeper, arguing with the boy the day before he died. A lover's quarrel, perhaps?" Lila stepped out. "That is a lie." Brady looked at her. His eyes were dead. "You are a person of interest. Miss Reyes, I think it is best if you come with us. We have a cell in the basement of the courthouse, very private. We can get to the bottom of this." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. The basement cells were notorious. Women who went in there often did not come out. Or if they did, they were broken beyond repair. "She is not going anywhere," Silas said. He racked the lever of his rifle. The sound was loud in the quiet yard. Brady's men tensed, hands hovering over their pistols. "You going to shoot us, Sheriff?" "Silas," Brady asked, "that is hanging way. If you try to take her, I will empty this rifle," Silas said. "I might hang." "Brady, but you will be dead before my boots leave the ground. Are you willing to die for this?" Brady looked at Silas. He saw the cold certainty in the rancher's eyes. Silas was not bluffing. He was a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him except the woman standing behind him. Brady smiled, tight and thin. "You are making it hard on yourself. Silas, harboring a suspect, obstructing justice. I can come back with a warrant. I can come back with 20 men. Then come back," Silas said. "But right now, get off my land." Brady spat on the ground. "We will be back. And when we are, I won't be asking nicely." He turned his horse and signaled his men. They rode off, the dust settling slowly. Lila let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her legs felt like water. "He will come back," she said, "and he will bring an army." Silas lowered the rifle. "Yes, he will." He turned to her. "We cannot stay here and wait for them," he said. "If we stay, we die." "What do we do?" Lila asked. "We fight," Silas said, "but not with guns alone. We need something stronger than bullets." He walked into the house and went to the heavy oak desk. He pulled out a drawer and removed a thick, leather-bound book. The ledger. For months, Lila had written in it. She had recorded the threats, the stolen cattle, the dates, the times. She had recorded Silas's confession to Dr. Aris. She had recorded the note found on Jimmy's body. "This is our weapon," Silas said, "but it is useless here. We need to get this to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. Brady owns the county, but he doesn't own the territory. Santa Fe is 200 miles, Lila said. Through the mountains, and Brady will be watching the roads, Silas said. He looked at her. We have to leave, Lila. Tonight, we pack what we can carry. We take the strongest horses. And we run. Lila looked around the room. This was his home. His father built it. His wife had died in it. He had poured his life into this soil. You are leaving everything, she said. The ranch, the cattle. If we leave, Brady will take it all. Silas looked at the walls, at the portraits of his ancestors, at the hearth where he had sat for so many lonely nights. It is just wood and stone. Lila, he said, it is just dirt. He reached out and took her hand. This time, she did not flinch. She squeezed back. You are the only thing in this valley worth saving, he said. The landscape mirrored their desperation. The drought had turned the San Juan Basin into a tinderbox. The grass was brown and brittle. The wind, which had returned with a vengeance, screamed through the canyons, kicking up dust storms that turned the day into twilight. They spent the afternoon preparing. They worked in silence, moving with the efficiency of soldiers. Dutch and old Pete were paid off with the last of the gold. You boys ride for Colorado. Silas told them, don't look back. We ain't leaving you, boss, Dutch said, hefting a shotgun. You can't help us where we are going, Silas said. Go. Live to tell the truth when the time comes. Reluctantly, the hands saddled up and rode north. The ranch was empty now, save for Silas and Lila. As the sun began to dip, painting the world in violent shades of orange and blood red, Lila stood on the porch. She wore trousers under her skirt, a shirt of Silas's that was too big, and her coat. She had her knife on her belt and a Winchester in a scabbard. She was not the frightened girl who had arrived months ago. She was forged. Silas came out of the house. He locked the front door, a symbolic gesture. He handed Lila the reins of the bay mare. Are you ready? He asked. Lila looked at the horizon, where the dust clouds swirled like dancing ghosts. She thought of Jimmy. She thought of the shopkeeper's sneer. She thought of the sheriff's dead eyes. She swung into the saddle, the leather creaking. She looked down at Silas. Let us go find some justice, she said. Silas mounted his black gelding. He adjusted his hat low over his eyes. Don't look back, he said. They rode out of the yard, leaving the Mercer ranch behind. They did not take the road. They cut across the open range, heading for the high passes of the San Juans, riding straight into the teeth of the wind. Behind them, the shadows lengthened, dark and hungry, chasing them toward the night. The high country of the San Juan Basin was a place where the wind went to sharpen its teeth. Up here, amidst the granite spires and twisted bristlecone pines, the air was thin and smelled of resin and coming snow. Silas Mercer and Lila Reyes had traded the comfort of a roof for the cold sanctuary of an old line shack, a rough structure of chinked logs built by Silas's father 40 years prior. They were not running anymore. They were hunting. The plan had been formed in the low light of a tallow candle 2 nights ago. They could not outrun the sheriff's reach. His telegrams would travel faster than their horses, and a warrant for murder would follow them to every corner of the territory. To survive, they had to destroy him, and to destroy a man like Sheriff Brady. They needed more than bullets. They needed paper. They needed the ledger he kept of his bribes, or a living witness who could testify before a federal marshal in Santa Fe. The tension in the high camp was brittle. They slept in shifts. Lila took the first watch, wrapped in 3 blankets, her back against the rough bark of a pine, watching the trail that snaked up from the valley floor. The silence was absolute, broken only by the snap of a twig or the distant scream of a cougar. Every shadow looked like a man. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a boot on stone. Silas spent the daylight hours turning Lila into a weapon. It was not a game. There was no romance in the way he stood behind her, adjusting her grip on the heavy Winchester rifle. Pull it tight into your shoulder, he instructed, his voice flat. If there is air between the stock and your bone, the recoil will bruise you black and blue. Lean into it. Lila sighted down the barrel at a dead stump 50 yards away. The rifle was heavy, the metal cold against her cheek. She did not like it. It smelled of oil and death. But she remembered Jimmy's face in the dust. She remembered the trapper. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, the sound cracking through the thin air like a whip. Bark exploded from the stump. Again, Silas said. Don't close your eyes when you fire. You need to see where the bullet goes. I am not closing my eyes, Lila said, working the lever. She fired until her shoulder ached and her ears rang. She learned to load the magazine with cold fingers. She learned to draw the heavy Colt revolver from the holster Silas had rigged for her belt. She learned to ride her mare not with the gentle grace of a pleasure rider, but with the low, driving urgency of a fugitive, leaning off the side to present a smaller target. We are baiting a trap, Silas told her on the third evening. We need to draw them out. We need one of them alive. The bait was a small herd of 20 steers Silas had driven up to the high meadow weeks ago for summer grazing. They were prime beef, fat on the mountain grass. Silas rode down to the nearest settlement, a mining camp called Silverton, and let slip to a man he knew was a gossip that he was leaving the territory and the herd was unguarded. It was a gamble. It relied on greed being stronger than caution. But betrayal has a way of finding cracks in even the best plans. They had expected the rustlers to come from the south. They had expected strangers. They did not expect the man who rode up the trail just before dusk on a Thursday, waving a white handkerchief. It was Miller, a man who had worked the Mercer spread for 5 years before drifting to the mines. Silas lowered his rifle but kept it ready. "Boss," Miller called out, his hands high, "I heard you were in trouble. I came to help. Brought some coffee and word from town." Silas watched him. Miller looked honest. He looked like the man who had once helped Silas pull a calf from a mud bog. "Step down," Silas said. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Miller dismounted. He walked toward the campfire, smiling. "I tell you, Silas, that sheriff is turning the valley upside down. But I know a trail north, through the Uncompahgre, that he doesn't watch." Lila was standing by the horses, checking the cinches. She watched Miller. She saw the way his eyes darted to the ridge line. She saw the sweat on his upper lip. Though the air was freezing, "He is lying," she thought. The realization was cold and instant. "Silas, behind you!" Lila screamed. The crack of a rifle from the ridge answered her. A bullet kicked up the dirt inches from Silas's boot. Miller dropped the act, diving for cover behind a log, drawing his pistol. "You should have sold out when you had the chance." "Mercer!" he yelled. The canyon erupted. Gunfire rained down from the rocks above. It was an ambush. Miller hadn't come to help. He had come to fix their position for the sheriff's deputies. Silas rolled behind the water trough, returning fire with his Winchester. "Get to the rocks. Lila, go!" Lila scrambled toward the granite outcrop they had designated as a fallback. Bullets chipped the stone around her, sending sharp fragments flying. She didn't freeze. She didn't scream. She brought her rifle up and fired at a muzzle flash on the ridge. She saw a man jerk back. She didn't know if she had hit him or just scared him. And she didn't care. She reached the rocks. Silas was pinned down near the shack. Miller was firing at him from behind the log, laughing. "Give it up! Silas!" Miller shouted. "Hatcher is up there. They just want the girl. You can walk away." Lila looked at Silas. He was reloading, his face a mask of concentration. He would not walk away. He would die right there in the dirt before he let them take her. Lila made a choice. She would not be the reason he died. She saw a narrow gully that led up the side of the slope, hidden by scrub oak. If she could flank them, she could break the pin. She moved. She ran low, scrambling up the loose shale. Her breath tore at her lungs. She could hear the shouts of the men above. "There she is! Hatcher's voice! Get her!" She had been spotted. 2 men scrambled down the slope toward her. One was Hatcher. The other was a stranger. Lila dropped to one knee. She leveled the rifle. She remembered Silas's voice. "Lean into it." She fired. The stranger spun around, clutching his shoulder, and fell, sliding down the scree. Hatcher kept coming. He was fast. He tackled her before she could chamber another round. The rifle flew from her hands. They rolled in the dirt, rocks digging into her back. Hatcher was heavy, smelling of sweat and whiskey. He pinned her arms, grinning, his face inches from hers. "Got you now, you little savage," he hissed. "We are going to have a long talk in the dark, you and me." Lila didn't plead. She didn't struggle against his weight. She went limp for a second, fooling him. Then she bucked her hips with explosive force and drove her forehead into his nose. Bone crunched. Hatcher roared, rearing back, blood streaming down his face. Lila scrambled backward, reaching for her knife, but Hatcher was already reaching for his gun. Suddenly, a massive shape lunged out of the brush from the higher trail. It was a man, swinging a rifle stock like a club. It connected with the back of Hatcher's head with a sickening thud. Hatcher collapsed like a cut string. The man stood over him, breathing hard. He was Dutch, the big, slow-witted ranch hand who was supposed to be in Colorado. "I ain't leaving." "Boss," Dutch rumbled, looking down at Lila. Lila stared at him, gasping. You came back." Dutch shrugged. "Colorado's too far, and the food ain't as good." Below them, the firing had stopped. Silas had rushed Miller while the deputies were distracted by the fight on the slope. He had Miller on his knees, the barrel of his Colt pressed against the man's forehead. Lila scrambled down the slope, sliding on her heels, Dutch following. Silas was trembling. His face was twisted in a rictus of pure, unadulterated rage. Miller was weeping, his hands clasped in prayer. "Don't kill me! Silas, please, they paid me! I needed the money!" Silas pulled the hammer back. The click was loud in the sudden silence. "You sold us!" Silas snarled. "You sold a woman to Hatcher. You are an animal, Miller, and I put down animals." "Silas!" Lila's voice cracked the air. Silas didn't look at her. He stared at Miller. His finger whitened on the trigger. He wanted to do it. He wanted to end the threat, to punish the betrayal, to give in to the bloodlust that his father had bequeathed him. It would be so easy. It would feel like justice. "Silas, look at me," Lila commanded. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were wild, the pupils dilated. "If you kill him like this, on his knees, you become Hatcher," Lila said. She walked toward him, ignoring the gun. "You become your father, and you lose me." Silas blinked. The name of his father struck him. "We need him," Lila said, stepping next to him. She put her hand on his gun arm. "We need him to talk. Dead men don't sign confessions." Silas looked at Miller, who was sobbing in the dirt. He looked at Lila, who was bloody, bruised, but standing tall. He slowly lowered the hammer. He holstered the gun. "Tie him up." "Dutch," Silas said, his voice shaking. "Tie him tight, and throw Hatcher in the shed with him." Night fell heavy and cold. The adrenaline that had fueled them crashed, leaving them hollowed out. They had captured Miller and an unconscious Hatcher. The other deputies had fled when their leader fell. They retreated to the line shack. Dutch took the watch outside, happy to be of use, armed with Hatcher's confiscated rifle. Inside, Silas lit a fire in the small potbelly stove. The room was tiny, intimate. The wind howled outside, but inside, the air was still. Lila sat on the edge of the narrow bunk, cleaning the scrape on her cheek with a wet rag. Silas sat on a crate opposite her, staring at his hands. "I almost did it," he whispered. "I wanted to paint the ground with him." "But you didn't," Lila said. Silas looked up. "Because you stopped me." "No," Lila said. "You stopped yourself. You listened. A monster does not listen." She stood up and crossed the small space between them. She took his hands. They were cold and rough. "I saw you today. Silas, I saw you run into fire for me, and I saw you choose mercy when you wanted vengeance." Silas looked at her. The dirt and blood on her face did not mar her beauty to him. It only made her more real. She was a survivor. She was his equal. "I cannot be the man I was," he said. "I cannot undo November." Lila let go of his hands and placed her palms on his face. "No," she said softly. "You cannot. That man is part of you, but he is not all of you. And he is not the man I see tonight." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a question this time. It was a claim. Silas made a sound low in his throat and pulled her to him. He buried his face in her neck, holding her tight, as if the wind might snatch her away. There was no negotiation needed this time. The consent was in the way she pulled him closer, in the way he waited for her to guide him. They moved to the narrow bunk. The darkness of the room was not frightening. It was a cloak. They did not tear at each other. There was a desperate slowness to it, a need to be gentle in a world that was hard. Silas touched her with a reverence that bordered on worship, his hands tracing the scars of her past and the strength of her present. Lila held him, feeling the weight of his grief and his love, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel like property. She felt like a choice. It was a night of trembling relief. It was the physical breaking of the solitude that had held them both prisoners for so long. The morning sun did not bring a miracle. It brought the harsh, gray light of reality. Lila woke first. She lay still for a moment, listening to Silas breathe beside her. She felt the warmth of his body, the heavy arm draped over her waist. She did not feel shame, but she did not feel simple happiness either. She slipped out from under his arm and dressed in the cold air. She was still Lila Reyes. She was still a woman with a price on her head, in a territory that wanted her dead. Sleeping with Silas had not erased the past, it had only complicated the future. Silas woke as she was pulling on her boots. He watched her. "Good morning," he said. Lila looked at him. "Good morning." He sat up. He did not grin or gloat. He looked serious. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," Lila said. "And you?" Silas nodded. "I am." They did not speak of love. They did not need to. The work was waiting. They went out to the shed. Miller was awake, terrified. Hatcher was groggy, his nose a ruin, tied hand and foot. Silas crouched down in front of Miller. "You are going to write something for me." "Miller," Silas said, "you are going to write down every time the sheriff took a bribe. You are going to write down who killed Jimmy, and then you are going to ride with us to Santa Fe and tell the marshal." "Why would I do that?" Miller stammered. "Because if you don't," Silas said calmly, "I will leave you here tied to this post, and the winter is coming early. And," Lila added, stepping forward, "Hatcher here will tell everyone you turned on them to save your own skin. You think the sheriff will let you live if he thinks you talked? Your only safety is a federal jail cell." Miller looked at Hatcher, who was glaring at him with one swollen eye. He looked at the bleak mountains. "Give me the paper," Miller whispered. They spent the morning recording the confession. It was damning, a ledger of stolen cattle, intimidation, and murder for hire. It was enough to hang Brady twice over. As they finished, Dutch shouted from the ridge, "Boss, you better come look at this." Silas and Lila climbed up to the vantage point. Dutch was pointing south, toward the valley floor, miles away. A plume of black smoke was rising into the still air. It was thick and oily. It was coming from the location of the Mercer homestead. "They burned it," Silas said. His voice was devoid of emotion. Lila watched the smoke. She thought of the tack room, the kitchen, the porch swing. "They think they are hurting you," she said. "They think that house is your heart." Silas turned away from the smoke. He looked at Lila. "My heart is right here," he said. He checked his rifle. "Let it burn." It was just wood. "We have what we need." They loaded the prisoners onto the spare horses, tying their hands to the saddle horns. Dutch took the lead. Silas and Lila rode side by side. They turned their backs on the smoke and the ruin of the ranch. They turned their faces toward the pass that led to Santa Fe. They had the truth in a saddlebag, a witness in tow, and a fury that burned hotter than any fire the sheriff could set. The chase would be hard. Brady would not let them reach the capital without a fight. But as Lila looked at Silas, seeing the grim determination in his set jaw, she knew one thing for certain. They might die on this road, but they would not die on their knees. The road to Santa Fe was not a road at all. By late October, it was a wound in the earth, frozen hard by night and turned to a sucking slurry of mud by the midday sun. The San Juan Mountains did not care about justice, and they certainly did not care about urgency. They loomed over the small cavalcade, gray and indifferent, sending squalls of sleet that coated the riders in a sheen of ice. Lila Reyes rode with her scarf wrapped high around her face. Her eyes narrowed against the wind. Her mare was tired, head low, breath pluming in the thin air. Behind her, Dutch led the pack horses carrying the prisoners. Miller was weeping again, the cold having broken his spirit completely. Hatcher rode in sullen silence, his hands bound to the saddle horn, his broken nose dark and swollen. Silas rode point. He looked like a man carved from the granite of the peaks, unmoving, uncomplaining, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. He had barely spoken in 2 days. The weight of what lay ahead was heavier than the rifle in his scabbard. He was riding toward the law to save Lila, but in doing so, he knew he would have to destroy himself. They were 10 miles from the Rio Chama bridge, the last choke point before the road opened up toward the capital. "We rest here for an hour," Silas called back, his voice swallowed by the wind. "The horses need grain." They dismounted in a grove of aspen, the trees stripped bare, their white trunks looking like bones. Lila checked the cinches while Dutch poured oats for the animals. "You are quiet," Lila said, standing beside Silas. He was looking south, toward the gap in the hills. "Brady knows we are coming," Silas said. "He knows we have Miller. He knows the ledger is in your saddlebag. He will not let us cross the river." "Then we fight," Lila said. Silas turned to her. He took off his glove and touched her face. His hand was cold, but the touch seared her. "If it goes bad, Lila, you take the ledger and you ride. You do not wait for me. You do not look back. You get to the marshal. We go together," Lila said. That was the agreement. The agreement was justice. Silas said, "It does not matter who delivers it, as long as it arrives." He did not kiss her. The moment was too sharp for softness. He simply put his glove back on and turned to check his rifle. They reached the bridge an hour before dusk. The river was high, swollen with her early melt and rain, churning brown and angry against the wooden pilings. The bridge was narrow, a single lane of timber planks, and blocking the far side sat Sheriff Brady. He was not alone. He had brought 12 men, a posse raised from the saloon and the gutter, men who owed him money or feared his secrets. They were spread out in a skirmish line, rifles resting on saddles or rocks. Silas pulled his horse up. Dutch and Lila flanked him. "Well now," Brady shouted, his voice carrying over the roar of the water. "You look like you have had a hard ride. Silas, let us pass." "Brady," Silas yelled back. "We are going to Santa Fe." "I cannot do that," Brady said. He spurred his horse forward onto the bridge. "Just a few yards. You are harboring a fugitive. That woman is wanted for the murder of my deputy. And you, Silas, you have kidnapped 2 law-abiding citizens." He gestured to Hatcher and Miller. "Release them," Brady ordered. "And turn yourself in. We can settle this like reasonable men." Silas looked at the line of rifles. He looked at Brady, who sat confident in his corruption. Silas made a decision. It was the decision he had been wrestling with since the night he found Lila in the snow. "I will not release them," Silas shouted. "They are witnesses, and I am not a kidnapper." He spurred his horse forward, stopping 10 yards from Brady. The bridge creaked. "You want to talk about crimes?" "Brady?" Silas roared. "Let us talk about crimes." He stood up in his stirrups, turning so his voice reached the men behind the sheriff, the townsmen who had been told lies, the men who thought they were doing the right thing. "You told them I was protecting a temptress. You told them she lured me. You told them she is the villain." Silas took a breath. The cold air burned his lungs. "I am the villain." The declaration hung in the air. Even the river seemed to quiet. "I assaulted her." Silas screamed the truth, stripping himself naked before the world. "In November, in my own house. I crossed a line. I tried to take what was not mine. I abused my power. I am a man who lost his way." Lila watched him from her saddle, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the shame wash over him. But he did not buckle. He stood in it. "But this woman," Silas pointed back at Lila. She fought me. She survived me. And she did not murder your deputy. You had Jimmy killed to cover your theft. You burned my home because I have the proof of your rot." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the ledger. He held it high. "It is all here. Brady, every cow you stole, every bribe you took. Miller confessed to it all." At the mention of his name, Miller, terrified and sensing a chance to save his life, screamed from the back, "It is true. He made me do it. He killed Jimmy." The posse shifted, rifles lowered. Men looked at each other. They knew Silas Mercer. They knew he was a hard man, but they had never known him to be a liar. And a man does not confess to a shameful sin like assault unless he is telling the gods honest truth. Brady saw his control crumbling. He saw the doubt in his men's eyes. He saw the end of his reign. "Shut up!" Brady screamed. He drew his revolver. He did not aim at Silas. He aimed at Miller. He had to kill the witness. Gunfire erupted. It was not the glorious, slow-motion violence of a dime novel. It was sudden, loud, and ugly. Brady fired. The bullet missed Miller but struck the horse Dutch was holding. The animal screamed and reared, throwing the pack line into chaos. Lila did not hesitate. She saw Brady turning his gun toward Silas. She raised her Winchester and fired. Her shot took Brady in the shoulder, spinning him in his saddle. "Kill them!" Brady shrieked, clutching his arm. 3 of his most loyal deputies opened fire. The air filled with the buzz of lead. Splinters flew from the bridge railing. "Get down!" Silas yelled, diving from his horse. He hit the planks and rolled. Coming up with his Colt, he fired twice, dropping a man who was aiming at Lila. Lila spurred her mare, driving her toward the cover of a large boulder on the near bank. She dragged the pack horse with Hatcher attached to it. Miller's horse had bolted, dragging the screaming man into the trees. Dutch was hit. He grunted, clutching his side, but he kept firing his shotgun, the boom echoing like thunder. Silas was exposed on the bridge. He was the target. He moved forward, not back, advancing on Brady while bullets chewed the wood around his feet. Brady, bleeding and desperate, tried to raise his gun again. Silas stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the man who had tormented the valley. He looked at the badge that was supposed to mean safety. "It ends." Silas said. He fired one shot. The bullet struck Brady in the chest. The sheriff fell backward, tumbling from his saddle, over the railing, and into the churning brown water of the Rio Chama. The river took him instantly. Silence slammed back down. "Hold your fire!" Silas yelled at the posse. "He is dead!" "It is over!" The deputies looked at the empty saddle. They looked at Silas, standing tall and terrible on the bridge, smoke curling from his gun. They looked at Lila, who had her rifle trained on them, her face hard as stone. One by one, they lowered their weapons. They were not killers at heart. They were just men who had followed the wrong leader. "We surrender." "Silas," one of them called out. Silas lowered his gun. He slumped slightly, the adrenaline draining away. He turned and looked at Lila. She was safe. He limped back toward her. Dutch was sitting against a tree, pressing a bandana to his side. "Is it bad?" Silas asked. "Through and through," Dutch grunted. "I will live. Just hurts like a mule kick." Silas looked at Lila. She sat on her horse, the ledger still safe in her bag. She looked at him with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "You told them," she said quietly. Silas nodded. "I told them." Justice, when it finally arrived in Santa Fe, was not a celebration. It was a sterile, bureaucratic grinding of gears. They turned Hatcher and the ledger over to the UYS, Marshall, with Brady dead and Miller eventually found shivering in the woods. The case against the corruption ring was airtight. The ledger provided names, dates, and amounts. The territory moved quickly to clean up the mess, eager to restore order. But there was still the matter of Silas. The hearing took place in a dusty courtroom in November, almost exactly 1 year after the night he had assaulted Lila. The room was packed. Word had spread. Silas stood before the judge. He wore a clean suit, bought with the last of his coin. He did not have a lawyer. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, peering over his spectacles, "you are not on trial for the events at the bridge. That has been ruled self-defense and the lawful apprehension of criminals. However, by your own admission, You assaulted Miss Reyes. I did, Your Honor, Silas said. The courtroom murmured. Lila sat in the front row. She wore a simple gray dress. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her. Some pitying, some judging, some merely curious. Miss Reyes, the judge said, do you wish to press charges? Lila stood up. She walked to the railing. She looked at Silas. He did not look at her. He looked straight ahead, ready to accept whatever punishment came. Your Honor, Lila said, her voice clear. Mr. Mercer broke the law. He broke my trust. He acted with cruelty. She paused. But he also saved my life. He fought for me when the law would not. He destroyed his own name to speak the truth. He has paid a price in blood and ash. She looked at the judge. I do not ask for a prison sentence. It serves no one to put him in a cage. I ask that the court record reflect the truth. And I ask for restitution. Restitution, the judge asked. He owes me wages, Lila said. And he owes the valley a debt. Let him pay it by rebuilding what was broken. The judge deliberated. The sentence was handed down. Silas was fined $1,000, a fortune that would take years to repay. He was stripped of his honorary title as a stock commissioner. He was given a suspended sentence of 2 years, dependent on good behavior. It was a stain. He was no longer the respected widower. He was a man marked by his crime. But as they walked out of the courthouse, down the stone steps into the bright winter sun, Silas breathed deeply. He was poor. He was disgraced. But he was free of the lie. They returned to the valley in December. The winter was harsh, but not as cruel as the one before. They did not go back to the ruins of the ranch house. The fire had left nothing but a stone chimney standing like a tombstone. They moved into the bunkhouse, which had survived the blaze. It was a single long room. They hung a heavy canvas curtain down the middle. Lila, this side, she said, pointing to the end with the stove. Silas, that side. Agreed, Silas said. The work was brutal. They had lost most of the herd to the rustlers and the fire. They had to start over. They repaired fences with numb fingers. They hunted deer for meat. They lived on cornmeal and coffee. The town of Aztec remained cold to them. The shopkeeper, Henderson, still sneered when Silas walked in, but he sold him goods because cash was scarce. The women still crossed the street to avoid Lila, but Lila did not lower her head. When a woman turned away, Lila stopped and stared until the woman looked back. She refused to be the shame of the valley. She was its survivor. One afternoon in March, Lila was planting a garden near the blackened foundation of the old house. The soil was full of ash, but ash was good for growing. Silas was digging fence posts nearby. He stopped and wiped his brow. He walked over to the fence line where she was working. He leaned on his shovel. He watched her pat the earth down over a seed. Lila, he said. She looked up. Yes, Silas, I've been thinking, he said. He looked nervous. He looked like a boy asking a girl to dance, except his face was lined with tragedy, and his hands were scarred from fighting men. The curtain, he said. In the bunkhouse. What about it? Lila asked. I was thinking we could take it down. Lila sat back on her heels. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at him. Why? She asked. Because I am tired of sleeping alone, Silas said, and because I think we do better when we are not divided. Lila looked at the scar on his temple. She looked at the gray in his beard. She thought of the night in the line shack. She thought of the bridge. She stood up. She walked to the fence. If the curtain comes down, Lila said, it stays down, but the door still has a lock, and I still keep the key. Silas nodded. I would have it no other way. And, Lila added, leaning closer, her eyes searching his, you are not my owner. Silas, you are not my savior. You are just a man, and you are just a woman, Silas said. But you are the only woman I see. Lila smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. Then take it down, she said. Spring came fully in May. The valley turned a brilliant, aching green. The scars of the fire were hidden under new grass. The cattle, what few were left, grazed near the creek. Lila stood on the porch of the bunkhouse. They had added a room, a proper kitchen. She held a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. Silas came out behind her. He did not grab her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She leaned back into him, her head resting against his chest. Down in the yard, a neighbor's child, the son of the new family that had bought the Gable place, was chasing a dog. His laughter rang out, clear and bright, bouncing off the canyon walls. It was not a fairy tale. The town still whispered. The debt was still heavy. The nightmares still came sometimes. For both of them. Silas would wake up shouting, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. Lila would wake up gasping, feeling trapped. But when the nightmares came, they were no longer alone in the dark. Silas would hold her hand until her breathing slowed. Lila would stroke his hair until the tension left his body. They were not healed. They were scarred, stitched together by trauma and time. But the stitches held. Silas looked out at the land that had tried to kill them, the land that had taken his wife and son, the land that had birthed his violence and his redemption. "It is a hard country," Silas murmured. "Yes," Lila said, covering his hand with hers. "But the grass grows back." She turned in his arms and kissed him. It was a kiss of salt and earth, a kiss that tasted of survival. "Let them talk," Lila whispered against his lips. "Let them judge. We are here." And as the sun crested the peaks, flooding the San Juan Basin with light, the shadows retreated, just enough to let the living begin again. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the high desert, through the cold of winter, and into the difficult warmth of redemption. I hope Lila and Silas's story resonated with you, not as a simple romance, but as a testament to the hard work of forgiveness and the courage it takes to break the cycles of our past. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Did the ending feel earned to you? What did you think of Silas's choice on the bridge? If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the frontier, stories of grit, love, and the enduring human spirit. Share your thoughts in English. I read every one. Until next time, keep your fences mended and your powder dry.